Roger Wilkins, a professor locally here at George Mason University,
Mm-hmm.
had this to say about you in 1990. In my view, Shelby Steele does not have the intellectual candle power to merit the attention he gets. I do not say black people are without fault or that there is not a lot of effort required on our part to move us out of our predicaments, but our fundamental problem is not in our fears or uncertainties or defensiveness. Our fundamental problem is that we live in a racist society that's tilted against us.
Mr. Wilkins, like all of my critics, have only one thing to do, to go back and worship at the church of racism. They never answer any of the arguments I make or any of the criticisms I make. They just go back and say, this guy's crazy because he's not a true believer. In the dream deferred, I talk about this in some detail. The idea that we are still primarily victims of racism is a religion among certain segments of the black community, particularly the black leadership, which has all of its power and all of its wealth, particularly its wealth, invested in the idea that we are victims of racism. So here comes somebody like Shelby Steele, I can name many others, who says that this is not our #1 problem. It's maybe 15th on the list of problems. I'm taking food out of their mouth, food off their table. I'm saying to whites that you're stupid, you're crazy for giving these jokers money, and I mean it. You're not getting anything from it. And one of the reasons that it's so corrupt is that when corporations give money to the NAACP, the civil rights leadership, they never even evaluate in any serious way what these organizations do. Why haven't they really made an inroad against poverty? They don't do anything but sit there and take the money. So somebody like me sort of shines a light on the whole sham, and so it's not surprising that the Roger Wilkins of the world would if people followed my line of thinking, he'd be out of work. He'd have to make an honest living. Bill Cosby committed the unpardonable sin. He looked at black people and said, you need to help yourselves. You need to stop this kind of behavior, stop this kind of behavior. You need to pay more attention to your children. You need to make sure they're raised better, that they're prepared, that you raise them in a way so they're ready to benefit from education when they go to school. All of these things are responsibility. You need to turn off that mindless music that is corrupting and distracting. You need to, and he said all these things that he thought black people ought to and should do for themselves. Well, he's now in the territory of the black conservative. He's now in the territory of people like myself, like Thomas Sowell, and so many others who have looked at the sacred cow of black responsibility and said, that's not racism. That's freedom. The way to equality, the way to opportunity is through our own responsibility. And of course, all the powers that be then came down on Mr. Cosby, a ton of bricks, and shut him up and go back to, again, as I say, all my critics, all Cosby's critics, all critics of black, all of them will do one thing and one thing only. They run back to the church of racism. They love racism. They roll around in racism as though it were money, and it very often is money. They love it. If white people stopped being racist, they wouldn't know what to do. They wouldn't know who they are. And they just absolutely adore it and cannot get enough of it. If there's a racist event somewhere, they rent a jet plane and fly to it because they smell the power in it. They smell the money in it. These people love racism. And Cosby is in effect saying, well, our really serious and profound problems don't have anything to do with racism. They have to do with problems in our own community that we need to change. And so, boy, Mr. Dyson and many others who had to come down on him and castigate him for doing that. And I remember many times when he first made these remarks, people would come up to me and say, well, he's talking like you now, but he's probably going to get away with it. I said, well, I hope he does get away with it, but I kind of doubt it. When you've got people that are that invested in race, people do not realize how black people are terrified of freedom. And when you're terrified of freedom, when you don't feel comfortable, you don't know how to move, you don't know how to be successful, and there's all these white people around you who are successful and who do know how to deal with it, you hate freedom because it humiliates you. And what people like, successful people like Bill Cosby saying, freedom can be seized. It can be, you can have it too. But you got to stop saying you're a victim of racism. You got to stop thinking that way. You got to stop, you have to begin to think like a master rather than a slave. You have to think that freedom is open to you too. This is a revolutionary idea in black America, which makes the point of how far behind we are. What I'm saying here, what Cosby's saying, what other black conservatives are saying, is not rocket science. It's just common sense applied to in a social way. Anybody can see these things. But today it is absolutely, I'm called a radical and so forth, and I am radical because most blacks still are at the altar of racism, which protects them from freedom. As long as they've got racism, as long as they can embrace it and hug it, then they don't have to be humiliated by freedom. The minute you give up racism, you will be, and you're not successful and you don't know what to do, you're going to be humiliated by freedom. So what we're doing, the people who screamed for centuries that we wanted to be free and finally became free, and now we have turned tail and run from it because it's humiliating. This is understandable. Every group that comes out of oppression goes through this. It's going on right now in the Islamic world. They too are running into some sort of identity madness, Islamic extremism, rather than because they don't know how to deal in freedom. They're doing exactly the same thing that we're doing. But the problem is not racism.